As a professor for human-computer interaction, my job is actually pretty simple. It's about shaping the future interfaces for human and machine interaction and communication. And today I would like to talk about one interface paradigm to which I really dedicated a big part of my life, which is virtual reality. And I would like to speculate a little bit about the future of this technology. But before we will actually go to the future, I would like to do a short preview or backview to the past. So I'm curious, how many of you know this person? Could you please raise your hand? So I just see like 2, 3, 4 people. So this is Ivan Sutherland. Ivan Sutherland is one of the creators of computer graphics, one of the pioneers that we have here. And in 1965, he wrote a wonderful essay called The Ultimate Display. And in his essay, he speculated what an ideal, an optimal computer display would look like. And he concluded with, the ultimate display would of course be the room within which the computer can control the existence of matter. And he also gave some examples what that means. So he said, a chair displayed in such a room would be good enough to sit in. Handcuffs displayed in such a room would be confining. And a bullet displayed in such a room would be fatal. And I was always wondering, who wants to live in an ultimate display in which handcuffs, bullet, and guns are item of the daily agenda? But he also wrote that with appropriate programming, such a display could literally be the wonderland into which Alice walked. So the ultimate display would be a computer-mediated reality which gets indistinguishable from the real world. And this notion of a virtual reality environment is often used in science fiction to question if our perceptions are real or not. And movies like The Matrix are a prominent example of this perceptual ambiguity. And actually, this notion that our entire surrounding is just a computer simulation has been shown the first time in the German movie World on Wire, directed by Rainer Fassbinder in 1973. Surprisingly, just 5 years before this science fiction movie came out, Ivan Sutherland was actually able to build a first prototype of his ultimate display. And this is an original video footage of Ivan testing this prototype. So what you can see here is Ivan using actually the first augmented reality display ever. It consisted of a semi-transparent screen to which you could project simple lines in this case, and you had this electromechanical tracking device which ensured that he's able now to see the stereoscopic wired cube in space from different positions just by moving basically around, like Alice in the Wonderland. From there, it took 25 years until I got in contact with VR the first time. That was in Berlin in the Cyberspace Cafe, illustrated here. That was during the 90s, during the first hype of this technology. And what I could do there is play basically VR games. So what I saw there, I just recognized later what that actually was, but this was one of the W industry machines, later called virtuality machines, from the company Virtuality, founded by Jonathan Walden. And what you see on the left side is the Cyber 1000 CS. So back at that time, people thought that's a name for the future. And what you could do on this device is actually you could play games. So I played for €5 back at that time, about 5 minutes, a game of Deck Tile Nightmare. Has anybody of you ever played that game? Could you raise your hand? So we have a couple of people here, that's cool. So what you could see there is like a flat shaded, approximately 30,000 polygons. You have this checkerboard platforms which are connected by stairs. And you could actually play with multi-users in this setup. So everything that you see here, although it really looks like bad from a perspective from today, contained already all essential components of today's VR games. Head-mounted display, stereoscopic rendering, tracking, sound, as well as multi-user networking. However, as you can also see at that time, that was during the first hype of VR, the systems were really bulky, they were really expensive, they were not available in our living rooms. They have unacceptable latency, the resolution was really poor. And the problem at the time really was that VR did not make it to the mass market due to these problems. And VR instead became a common narrative back at that time. And it became pretty clear around the millennium that virtual reality is not the future, or was not the future, how humans interact with computers. The real revolution came in a different form factor, and we all have it, it's smartphones. And ironically, the rebirth or the renaissance of VR is based on all the advancements that we got in the smartphone technology today. And all components that we have in today's ultimate displays, illustrated here, are based basically on advancement in smartphone technology. LCD screen, OLED screens, IMUs, gyroscope, GPU power, and so on. And today the ultimate displays basically look like this. And we're getting closer to this notion of an ultimate display. And we really get a glimpse to the future, and this technology almost gets tangible. And you see that the hype really started again. But this time we are really prepared, since the technology is so much further than it was in the 90s. However, there are still many challenges that we have to address until we really have an ultimate display. And here are just a couple of the challenges from a scientific, technological, as well as social point of view, in which my group, for example, is interested. And due to the matter of time, I will not speak about all of them, but just want to show you a couple of examples of projects that we are working on. So one is about cyber sickness, which is still a big issue in virtual reality. So one of the most accepted theories about cyber sickness is the conflict sensory theory, basically telling you as soon as your conflicts are, your sensors are in conflict, that makes you sick. So think about sitting static on a desktop table, but seeing basically a virtual movement. So your body sensors, vestibular, proprioceptive sense, tells you you're static, whereas your visual sense tells you that you're moving. These kind of conflicts make you sick. It's getting better with the current technology, but we were really interested in how far does VR affect you and maybe your brain and your health if you don't use it just for 1 hour or 2 hours, but for long term. Maybe like 8 hours per day on a daily basis for a couple of months or something like that. So what we did like 3 or 4 years ago in 2014, that was published, we performed a self-experiment, so I was the only participant back at the time who spent 24 hours in a virtual reality environment. And what you could see here is myself at the time, so I had a backpack, and I could walk around this physical setup that you can hear, which was built by my students. So I had a couch, as you can see there was a bed, or basically a mattress just laying on the floor. There was a table and a desktop at which I could virtually work. This is like the virtual Unity scene, which kind of matched the real-world surrounding. So for example, if I want to sit on the couch, I could go to the virtual couch, and there was a corresponding physical couch, so I can really sit on that couch. But the students also developed a virtual island for me, so I could teleport from the virtual apartment to the virtual island and back. So here are a couple of pictures the students took during the experiment. And on the right side, you see a 24 hours activity map, which shows basically what I did in the virtual environment. And as you can see on the bottom part, so this is where I basically slept. And let me tell you, sleeping is not easy with a head-mounted display on your face. You could also see that this orange part is basically entertainment. So I watched movies, I listened to music, I surfed the web. You have some red areas there, which means working. Usually I work more, but it was really difficult with a head-mounted display. For example, writing emails. It was the DK1, so the resolution was really bad at that time. And you could also see that I had some diet, so I was eating with a head-mounted display. And again, this is also not like super easy, having a head-mounted display and trying to drink something or trying to eat something. Here are And during that time, we did a lot of measurements in terms of, we measured my cyber sickness, we measured my heart rate, we filled out questionnaires and so on. Here's maybe some of the most interesting thing regarding the cyber sickness. So the gray line that you see on the bottom is kind of a baseline. These are the results of a standard questionnaire called the Kennedy Simulator Sickness Questionnaire, which I filled out every second hour. And here you can see basically if I do not use any VR technology, that's the gray line, which is really low. That's the baseline. And low means good here. Yeah? So that means no symptoms of cyber sickness. And you can see for all the other aspects, basically cyber sickness increased. It's not really dramatically. Actually, this y-axis can go up to 400. Usually you will throw off in a region of 300. Yeah? So actually, it was not like that I really had heart problems and were thinking about to cancel the experiment, but still you recognize it's not like super healthy for you doing that. And one really important thing is, until now, we don't know what this technology will do to us if we use it really for long-term exposure. So another aspect we are really interested is locomotion. So Ivan Sutherland, in his essay, wrote "The Wonderland into which Alice walked." And this is kind of the goal of a lot of projects that we are working on. So the idea is that a user should be able to explore a virtual environment in the most natural way. And this is not by using some kind of control devices or some kind of gamepads, but it's by walking, as we do in the real world, just using gates and using real walking to explore a virtual environment. To implement real walking in virtual reality is super easy. You have seen that in the Vive setup. You have a corresponding area in which you can track a user, and now what you just do is map all the motions that you track in the real world one-to-one to camera motions in the virtual world. The problem is, of course, that the virtual environment is usually much larger than the physical space that you can track. And if you want to allow real walking, that basically means that at a certain situation, the user might collide, for example, with a physical wall, or they might just walk outside the tracking space. So we were interested, can we allow unlimited walking in a confined space? And so we considered actually redirected walking. And let me briefly illustrate the concept here. So assume that this might be your living room with a door, people or your user is standing in your living room that might be tracked, and you have a physical chair, for example. Assume now that a user dons on a head-mounted display, as illustrated here, with, for example, a virtual chair. And as you know, the user could not sit on this virtual chair now. But eventually the user might just want to go there. So assume the user wants to go to this virtual chair. What we do now is, instead of using a one-to-one mapping, we introduce slight rotations while the user is walking. And we do it in such a small way that the user is not able to observe that. So while the user tries to walk to this chair, the entire scene is slightly rotating around the user, and the user will unknowingly compensate for this manipulation by walking on a circular arc, while still believing that he or she walked straight path in this virtual environment. And the cool thing is, due to this manipulation, the virtual chair now shifted the position in the real world and is now co-located with a physical chair. And that actually means that this physical chair will provide now passive haptic for the virtual chair. So actually the user could sit now on this virtual chair, which was one of the goals of Ivan Sutherland. And we performed a series of experiments, so-called psychophysical experiments in cooperation with our psychology department, in which we tried to figure out how much can we actually trick a user. And what you see here is some footage of a demo in which you can see the user wearing an older version of a head-mounted display and a backpack so they can walk freely around in the space. But what you see is that the user basically circles on a circular arc, here approximately with a radius of 3 or 4 meters, whereas in the virtual environment illustrated here, the path was almost straight. And we figure out that, for example, in a space like this will work without any problems. So I could basically guide each of you in a circular arc while you actually believe to walk straight. But you would need a space basically like this. And it's really cool to see that some of these concepts from research that we did in the last decade or so now really gets to mainstream. So this is the footage of The Void. Has anybody of you heard about that? Okay, so what you can see there is basically a theme park which uses this concept of redirected walking. So they have like a physical amusement park in which you can walk around and you have the illusion that you can really walk, for example, through a spaceship or much larger environments. And what you see is the physical setup that they built provide you with passive haptic feedback. So you can touch the walls or you can, for example, touch this kind of physical setup in which you have the illusion that this is like a touch screen in the virtual world, although it's just a physical wall in the amusement park. The last aspect I would like to talk about regarding our research is on social challenges. So as a computer scientist, I'm always get confronted with a sad situation that we have approximately a little bit less than 20% of female students or professors at our departments. But this was not always the case. So if you consider, for example, here the ratio of female students in corresponding studies like medical, law, physical, or computer science, you see that starting approximately at the middle of the last century, the numbers increased for all these kind of studies. And for most of the time, the number of female students in computer science was higher than in law or physical science, for example. But then something happened in the middle of the 80s. And from that point on, the number of female students just dropped down. So the question is, what actually happened in the middle of the 80s? Well, and from a computer science perspective, one of the most important things which happened then was basically the beginning of the era of the personal computer, most dominantly known with the introduction of the Apple Macintosh. And since then, the personal computer basically skyrocketed. And back at the time, a personal computer was specifically marketed as a boy's toy, as a toy, as a tool for boys, for men. And at that time in the media, you could basically see that everybody was kind of claiming this is how a computer user looks like. Yeah, and probably most of you have seen similar movies in which we see this nerdy person with big glasses, and this kind of strange behavior, right? And this is kind of the image that was transported via media of a typical computer user. And for me as a computer science person, it was really hard, and it's still hard to fight this kind of prejudice. So the question really is there, what will happen in 2016, now where we have maybe another transition away from the era of personal computing, away from the area of graphical user interface, towards maybe spatial computing, towards an area of natural user interfaces. Well, to be honest, I hope that the media will not show this image of a VR user, which is kind of nerdy again, tries to escape real life, is socially isolated in a virtual environment. I had to fight this prejudice again and again, and I'm really getting tired of that. So I'm really hoping that we will not see images and movies like this illustrating typical VR users. So this brings us to the future, and I would like to kind of finish my talk in the last 5 minutes maybe about an outlook. How will this evolve? So this is where we are now. We are very close to the ultimate display. We are not quite there yet. So according to all broadcasts and forecasts that we have, people assume that we will have exponential advancements in number of applications, number of users, number of sales, and so on. This is a forecast from 2015, and you can see that it's pretty accurate for 2016. So we are currently in the range of maybe approximately 5 million head-mounted displays sold, although most of them the cheap version of the Google Cardboard. So Vive and Oculus are a little bit behind that expectation. The good thing is, you have seen this exponential advancement, and as a computer science person, this looks very familiar to us. And actually, we work this as exponential advancement in computing power since more than 100 years. It's most dominantly known from Moore's law, which is about integrated circuits, but actually the exponential advancement goes back even until the Industrial Revolution 1 to 2. So we saw this exponential advancement not only for integrated circuits, but also for transistors, for vacuum tubes, for relays, and for electromechanical computing. So we have seen that the situations that I showed you back in the last century of Ivan Sutherland, the first hype, and the current situation that we have, that it took 25 years from the first introduction from research until the first hype. Then we had like 20 years until the next hype. So I suggest let's have a look to the next 15 years. So what will happen in the next 15 years? And the good thing is, we're talking about exponential advancements. This is just a mathematical function, and you can just use it to predict what's going on in the future. So this is like a conservative estimate of Moore's law. It has been introduced by David House, one of his colleagues, which also incorporates that with every new generation of chips, these chips also get a little bit better and faster. So it basically suggests that every 18 months, your computing power will be double as good as today. And you can express this with this mathematical equation. Performance P in Y plus 1.5 years is equal to 2 times the performance that we have today. And you can use this now for a recursive definition and just take a look what happens in 15 years. And then you get the computing performance in 15 years will be double as good in 13.5 years, which means it's 4 times better than in 12 years, and so forth, until you come to the point that you see, in 15 years we will have computing power which is 1,000 times better than today. And just think about what that means. Being 1,000 times better in computing performance regarding bandwidth, regarding resolution, regarding computing power. And among the several problems and challenges that we can solve if all these aspects are 1,000 times better than today is the graphics Turing test. How many of you have heard about the Turing test? So the goal of the Turing test is, can we implement an artificial intelligence in such a way that a human user cannot tell if it's a human or a computer machine? And here the twist with the graphics Turing test is, can we render a virtual environment, virtual objects, in real time in such a way that the human observer cannot tell if this is a real object or if it's a virtual object? So think about, the goal is here, programming a computer game from which we cannot tell if it's a computer game or if it's a movie you're watching. And in 2006, colleagues, McGuigan and colleagues, made some mathematical expression in which they try to figure out what is the GPU power we need for that. And they figure out it's about 1 petaflop of GPU power which has to be fulfilled. Currently, we are in the range of 1 to 10 teraflops. That means actually that being 1,000 times better, this will be easily solved. So from our point now, we can be pretty sure that in the next 10 to 15 years, we can render computer games in which you cannot tell if this is a movie or a game due to the visual quality, which will be so realistic. And just to give you a notion what that means, being 1,000 times better in realism, for example, when talking about computer graphics. When I finished high school in 1996, I spent a lot of time, usually I give this talk to my students, so I spent a lot of time with learning, but in addition I played games. So what I played at that time, one of the best games was Lara Croft. This was the rendering that you could achieve in 1996, so this was kind of the best rendering available then. If you just move forward 1.5 decades later, this is already a couple of years ago, you see what being 1,000 times better actually means in terms of graphic and realism. And just think about now, what would that mean in another 15 years? So being another 1,000 times better than the right one, being 1,000,000 times better than the first one. And just from thinking about that, it's really getting clear that we will see such virtual environments in which we cannot tell if this is real or virtual anymore. And to be honest, we are already able to render something like that, but we cannot do that in real time now. It will take like a couple of minutes per every frame. But being 1,000 times faster means we can do that in real time. Also, the form factor of the ultimate display will, of course, change. We will eventually see contact lenses, and all big players like Samsung, Apple, Google, Facebook, they all filed their patents regarding contact lenses, which can, on the one hand, display something to the user, but also kind of track the outside from the user. And actually, in research at the University of Washington in 2007, a colleague already developed a contact lens. And have in mind, this is already 5 years ago. This contact lens was able to just display a single pixel. And what he did is, he did also in vivo rabbit testing. So he put this contact lens to a rabbit, and the rabbit could see 1 virtual pixel here. According to the research paper, the rabbit survived and did not suffer from this experiment. However, nobody really asked the rabbit if it thought it is a good idea to put a contact lens in her eyes. So, we will see these kind of advancements in the next 15, maybe next 25 years. And in the meantime, of course, VR is still looking for the killer application. There are a lot of potential applications out there which are all exciting, but still we are currently in the phase that early adapters use this technology, nerds use this technology, but my grandma is not, right? And the killer application really means that everybody wants to have this technology, like smartphones, for example. Chances are good that the killer application is based on some of the usual suspects, so games, entertainment, real estate, architecture, tourism, or social media communication. As you know, Facebook invested $2 billion into a startup, Oculus, who built head-mounted displays. And they don't do that just because of fun, but they really believe that this is the new interface with which we will communicate in the future. But this technology, or the power of this technology, is so much greater. We have seen in the last 1 or 2 decades that this technology can, for example, be used for therapy and rehabilitation. So you can use this technology to fight, for example, phobias for spiders or heights or speaking in public. And another most important thing is this technology has really the chance to change the way or change our perspective, how we see ourselves, how we see others, or how we see the world. And this is like an essential building block for education and for empathy, which I think are one of the most important building blocks for the future of our society. So back in the 90s at the first hype, they said VR is dead. I really think that we are currently very close to this ultimate display. We have a glimpse and have already an idea what it will look like. We can almost feel it, how it will affect basically our future. And I'm really looking forward to this new area of personal or spatial computing. And I really believe in this technology and think that it can revolutionize and really improve the way how we teach, how we educate ourselves, how we entertain ourselves, how we communicate to each other, and really improve the way how we live as humans in a digital reality. So thank you for your attention.